Welcome to the Visibility Project Podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project Podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project Podcast.
Started by a group of citizens in a small Michigan town with a like-minded goal
of increasing the visibility
of the unseen and unheard populations in our community.
Our guests will share stories and insights
with the goal of increasing our awareness and knowledge
of various aspects of diversity and equity
to create a more connected, empathetic, and inclusive community.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
So let's get to work.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
Spearheaded by the members of the Cultural Awareness Coalition, the project is the brainchild of several organizations and individuals with shared values who sit on a project steering team. We hope that the podcast series creates a deeper empathy for others and serves as a catalyst for people to actively create a more inclusive community and world.
Welcome back to the Visibility Project Podcast. My name is Adam Salgett, a proud member of the team, and I'll be your host today. Today's episode is all about being honest with yourself. Are you brave enough to face the truth? Are you able to face the fear when you learn something new and it causes you to question? In the middle of discourse creating division, are you willing to consider another's perspective, educate past ignorance, and ask yourself why you think or feel the way you do? Eric Krause did and continues to embrace the uncomfortable opportunities to learn something new. Join him as he shares his journey of consideration and commitment to expanding his awareness beyond the limits of how he was raised. Transition into a chat with Sarah Weisbarth as they consider their roles as adult role models, especially in education, encouraging youth to embrace their diverse strengths and support inclusive belonging. Sarah Weisbarth is a current chairperson of the Visibility Project, leading a group of volunteers in their commitment to create a positive space for understanding. She believes elevating stories and lived experiences will transcend the barriers separating us. As Discover You Director with the Rock Center for Youth Development, she supports adults and youth with skills and tools so that youth will embrace their future with courage, confidence, and connection. Eric Krause is currently beginning his 26th year as a mathematics teacher at Midland High School in Midland, Michigan. He is also beginning his 20th season as boys varsity basketball coach. Eric didn't enter the teaching profession until he was 37 after various jobs in the business industry. He has been married for 37 years to his wife Kelly and has 3 sons, Christopher, Brandon, and Dominic, with respective ages of 32, 29, and 18. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you both for being here on the Visibility Project Podcast. Eric, can you set up who you are a little bit for us? Tell us a little bit about your background. Paint a picture.
Sure. Basically, grew up in area of Detroit near Grosse Pointe, Harper Woods until I was 12, and then we moved out to the suburbs, kind of like out in the middle of nowhere in Rochester, which we can't hardly afford to drive through now, but certainly if I had to go back in time, we wouldn't have been able to move there. But in 1971, we could, and I lived there until got married 12 years later, so another 12-year deal. And so we moved up here to Midland. I was in sales at the time in 1984. And after about, I guess only 8 years, was in business, various areas of sales, more or less, financial sales and business, and went back to school to get my teaching degree. And within a few years, after 2 children were born, so Christopher was born in 89 and Brandon in 92, I'd say that by 96, after I had long-term subbed at Dow High in 96, fall of 96, I was hired by Midland High. So I've been teaching math there since then. And then a few years after that, I started coaching varsity basketball. So I've been the boys varsity basketball coach going into my 20th year. So I have just turned 62 years old. So I think I'm the oldest person in Midland Public. And my wife has retired. She's younger than I, but she started in education like in 85. So she's been retired for 2 years. So that brings me to probably my last year coming up, if they don't get rid of me sooner, as far as teaching. And that's where I'm at right now.
You shared with us in kind of our pre-discussion a little bit about your days as a youngster and what it was like growing up in that region. And you were still, as you kind of labeled it, you were still in a predominantly white space.
Oh, yeah.
You were growing up.
Yes.
Yeah, in the Detroit region. Can you talk on that a little bit?
Yep. I've lived in basically all white communities my entire life. When you say Detroit, especially, 67 riots and so forth. 67 riots were like, that was far away. I couldn't ride my bike. I almost could ride my bike to a certain point. My parents said, you can't ride your bike to there. So I said, okay. So my own little world. And all I really cared about with the brother in Vietnam was the Tigers, who lost on a heartbreaking last day of their season in 67. So that was where my priorities were. So no. And so when we moved out in 71, Rochester's obviously in the suburbs, and good Lord, 99% white. And then we moved up to Midland in 84, rented for a few years, and then bought a place in Sanford. And then we built another home in the early 2000s. So yeah, for my whole life, I've lived in predominantly white community.
I don't want to fast forward too far, but it sounds like, from the stories you're telling us in the pre-interview, a little bit of, I don't want to use this term because it sometimes has a negative connotation, but I don't have a better word. So I'm going to say growing up blind.
Sure.
Just simply, like you said, you're kind of in your own little world.
Yep.
So you're not necessarily looking at too many of the other views or hearing them. You're kind of just looking at what's in front of you and moving forward. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'd say it wasn't that I ever refused
Sure.
alternate views.
Sure.
I was just never exposed to them that
Right.
much. I would say we give the word ignorant a bad rap. I think it's used in a very derogatory way, but if the truest sense of the word, I was ignorant. I mean, if you had me try to change the tire in my car now, I'm going to show you my ignorance in various mechanical ways.
Sure.
So, and I'm sure if you know other people, they'll tell me I have more than enough things that I'm ignorant about. But the actual phrase, of just not being aware of the truth behind it, I think, I'm ignorant about various topics, especially considering race.
And so for you, the pandemic hit. And it sounds like to me from what you've been sharing that you really started to think about, what's happening. So talk about when the pandemic hit and you explained to us that you had more time, right?
Right.
You had more time. You weren't as busy as you were.
Yep.
So talk about what that experience was like and then what changes you started having.
Sure. Yeah, with the pandemic, everything stopped. If it hadn't occurred, odds are, because of other things that have happened in our country and world that I'm pretty ignorant about, because you're concerned with raising a family and going about your job. And so it's not anything I'm proud of. But the bottom line is I don't think I would have really thought too much about what was going on. This past year, 2020, was obviously unique and will definitely be in the history books forever, with not only just the pandemic, but the political culture and so forth. So climate, I should say. So for me, it occurred with, the George Floyd incident did make me start looking at topics and think at least starting to stir. I really didn't have any set agenda that I'd be running with. It just made me start to wonder and look at things. Then there was the Black Lives Matter march that occurred in Midland. And I had spoken to some former students of mine who were black, and they had talked to me, and I was starting to go over some concepts with them. I shared a story with you with, one I'm sure you wouldn't mind, Jonathan Haynes. He wasn't a student of mine because he was brighter than I was when he was in fourth grade. But anyways, I knew him because at Midland High. And I was kind of unsettled with, I think it was I'm not on any, if anyone knows me, I'm not on any social media or anything, but I'm not sure what it was, Twitter or something, where he posted about some negative experiences at Midland. And I was meaning to talk to him because I had a good enough relationship with him, knowing him that, not in a mean way, but just say, man, I don't get it. I don't buy it, because he was homecoming king, very popular, goes off to Princeton. I'm sitting there going, man, Midland couldn't have been that bad.
Right.
And so I was going to call him right around the same time of the march, because another student of mine, Sam Robinson, who writes for MLive, he had, was trying to urging me that I should go, just talking about different topics that I was questioning him on. So I was getting ready to call Jonathan, saw him at the march. And then right before we hooked up, maybe that day, I said, whether it's divine providence or whatever, I thought of an incident of myself in junior high when we moved out to Rochester. It was just culture shock. I was Catholic school in Detroit. It was actually kind of big, but Rochester was booming, 900 kids, 2 grades, just afraid of getting beat up or swirly in the bathroom, whatever. Just it was traumatic for my body of my protected upbringing my whole life. It was really kind of traumatic. And so once I made friends through sports and so forth, and by 8th grade, I'm involved and people knew me, and there was a popular girl who wanted me to square dance with her, even though, like I said, I was years away from being interested in that. This girls frightened me to death. So anyway, what I thought of was that anytime you talk about West Junior High to me, you would think, well, that's a great experience. But it's like, no, my first and main thought is always those first 2 months scared the wits out of me. So it was traumatic for me.
So when you were to look at maybe the statistics, leader, captain of the basketball team, pretty girl likes them, most popular girl likes them. Right. A lot of people see these stats and think to themselves, well, it wasn't that bad. But truly, your truth and what you think about is the difficulty that you went through. And
so when I asked Jonathan, I go, is my analogy, I don't mean to demean what you've gone through, but is that analogy, it clicks for me. Does that work? And he affirmed it. So that was interesting. So
his truth was different. Yes. Compared to what you saw.
He went through some traumatic times, even though he did accomplish some things where you'd say, man, this guy's got it made. You're voted homecoming king and, friends, and you go off to Princeton, obviously a great experience. And he's not downplaying that. And I'm not downplaying how good West Junior High was for me, but because of some things that happened to me personally for those first 2 months, you're like, wow, you're freaked out a little bit.
So you were open-minded and ready to listen to that. Sarah, I'd like to bring you in and kind of ask you, because I know you have enough experience in this space to talk on it, that, everyone has a different truth to what they believe and their layer of what they've been through, their culture, their morals, their values. Everyone's is different. It sounds like Eric here had the opportunity to listen to someone and had an open mind to understand his. Can you speak on how important that is to understand that his truth is his truth and to respect it?
Well, Adam, thank you for kind of finishing the question in an area I feel I can speak on. Because when you say I'm really versed in these areas, I think the work that we've been doing with the Visibility Project has taught me that I'm not versed at all in the areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, marginalized populations. I'm nowhere near being an advocate or even knowing what that would begin to look like. But what I am an advocate for is about people starting to understand one another. And that is always the stake in the ground that I'm always going to come back to. And so listening, Eric, to your stories and Adam kind of drawing it together, I think one of the key things as we work to understand one another is recognize that we all have a lived experience and we have the opportunity to teach and learn and grow together. And it's in challenging ourselves, and it sounds like Eric's going to kind of take us that direction soon of like challenging our own perspective is the hard work and is the work that's going to start to change things.
Challenging your own perspective.
Absolutely.
So, and like I said, the pandemic hit, you felt like things kind of opened up for you and you had the opportunity, you had the mental capacity maybe, after being so busy for, so many years as a teacher to do that now. So you've taken part in the Black Lives Matter March. Mm-hmm. Where do we go from there?
Yeah, and backing up, the Black Lives Matter March, I was uncomfortable because I'm thinking of people going to think that I hate police. It's like, no, I don't hate police. I'm just going because I think there's some things going on that we need to look at differently as white people. And so, but you were wondering how you're going to be viewed. Not that, over years of getting older and really even coaching, you kind of steel yourself to, that I'm more comfortable than I was 25 years ago with people not liking me because of coaching. It's just something that occurs and you can't really get away from it. So you just go on and live. But I was not comfortable. I'm glad I went. So that was a good step for me, but I certainly wasn't out there. It was uncomfortable in a good way, I guess. So from there, I was asked to speak to the board because they had just adopted, Midland Public in June of 2020, adopted the anti-racism statement. I didn't even know about it, so I was told. And I think Jonathan was the one who asked me, he said, would you mind going to the board meeting just to lend your support at the statement? And so I did, and I had told them, turned out to be a bit more prophetic than I realized when I said, and I feel like I know the way I would have responded to that statement a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. So I did not mean to say that I am above these people in Midland. My point of saying, I know where we live, meaning predominantly a white area. And I think you're going to get some heat for this because even Eric Krause a couple years ago might very, very well have thought, well, wait a minute, this is getting a little overboard. What? So I know I just kind of put myself back in time a few years and said, I think you're going to have some heat. And I said, that's no excuse to back down. So go forward a few more months. There was an incident that occurred with a student that wore a rather strongly racist shirt, and administration at first glance wasn't quite sure how to do, but then to their credit, after I spoke to them, after the teacher alerted me that was involved, I felt like, no, I want this to be education. We are in the education business. We're not to expel anybody. That's not it at all. I felt that we needed to at least send a message, and like 1 day suspension with some education going on would have made sense. And turns out that that was disagreed upon, and I felt that we backed down. And so I spoke to the board in November explaining why, based on the statement that we adopted, why I felt we backed down. And so that, I don't know how many people knew about that or not, but then finally again in June, I spoke again about how even a board member wearing a Blue Lives Matter mask could be construed by some members of the population of our community as insulting, and I quoted somebody saying, they feel that it's not really I quoted someone saying Blue Lives Matter mask is really not honoring the police. It's more of a thinly veiled insult against black people. And I said I would have never known that someone would be upset. I'm supportive of police. I never would have thought that people would be mad, and I would have probably argued against the defense against it. So I brought that up because my whole point is we need to educate. I brought up, hey, I didn't even know anything about the Tulsa massacre. And how do we go through a public education system where something like that occurred and never even know about it? So I was urging that we need to try to educate truth, not opinion, our truths of what have occurred in our society, not based on any political agenda or whether we want to say never talk about it or we want to say, well, here's my opinion, whatever conspiracy theory, whatever you have. No, just let's talk about some facts that I'm just kind of amazed that I never learned.
Well, it's an incredible perspective. I'm reflecting. So I think about how I was raised. And I'm a little younger than you.
Most people are.
But I was raised in a rural community outside of Saginaw. Both my parents went to Arthur Hill, so that you can see like the Arthur Hill, Saginaw High differences there.
Quite a time of change when they were there as well, with a lot of controversy in our society at that time, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And so, I was born in Saginaw, moved out to a rural community, and grew up what I would consider to be very sheltered.
Sure.
Very sheltered. Much like you're saying, I didn't really know any different. I didn't know any different. And I've shared before in this podcast the story. I have an older brother, 4 years older than me. And when there was this massive argument in our household about who he was dating. And we went to a private school, small school, and I couldn't get my head around like why are mom and dad so angry about who my brother is dating, until I went and I dug into the yearbook, and it was a black gal. And there was this like part of my head that went, oh, okay. And then I went, no, why? Like there was this instant question of why. And I think that's actually how I've always looked at life. Like I've been the one to be like, I'm sorry, that doesn't sound right. Can you help me understand? So then even, I went to school up in the Upper Peninsula for college, came back to the Midland area, and have just comfortably sat in what is familiar, what is same, I guess. Not a lot of diversity around me. And even my father-in-law from my first marriage, he's from the Upper Peninsula, and they came to visit, and we're standing in Meyer, and he goes, wow, you have a lot of black people around here. And I remember thinking, where?
Yeah,
where? Because
yep.
At that time, I'm like, I couldn't even identify two black families in the city of Midland. And so I'm proud of Midland because I think we've become much more diverse. I'm proud of Midland Public Schools because I think they've addressed really difficult things happening within our school system. And I think the point is when we only have our perspective to come from, it is hard to start to shift and be able to see the perspective of another, because our experience and our truth is what it is, as is theirs. It doesn't mean that theirs is wrong because mine is mine. It's just, how do we start to say these issues, the truth, educate, these things happened, these things are happening. How do we come together and embrace one another? And even as I say this out loud, I get frustrated because it's like I hear the separateness in my statements of how do we come together? It's implying that we're apart.
But I think we are.
Yeah.
And that is no fault of any one person. We always were. It kind of dawned on me. I was so ignorant about the OJ trial. And everyone kind of remembers where they were if they're old enough when the verdict came out. And what was shocking to me was like, ooh, you watch large crowds of white people just shocked, some crying. Then you watch large groups of blacks celebrating. You're like, I remember I looked at my wife, I said, okay, we got a bigger problem with race than I thought, which is quite an ignorant statement because someone should have said, duh. Sure. But, the way I was brought up, we took care of race, Martin Luther King, and blah, blah, blah. And we come in and it's like, whoa. But then I kind of forgot about it, but I never forgot that point of saying I had no clue why the reaction was a certain way amongst people of color versus, the white people like myself going, what are you talking about? And it just was a slight glimpse into the future of where we are now. And I think the challenge now is, I feel like I need to speak because I feel I represent more maybe than I thought of people of being white. I think I represent who have grown up, like you and I, we know what we're talking about because we grew up in this area. Like we just didn't even think about it. We didn't talk. Good Lord, we moved out of Detroit. We moved out we moved out because, it's embarrassing to say, but because Detroit was getting black. That's why we moved. And that was what people said. Everyone just nodded. Right. Amongst where I moved, like, oh, okay, they're just getting black, and they had the riots and blah, blah, blah. And that was just a fact that we were brought up saying. So I'd like to think that when I try to express looking at a different viewpoint, that I am not coming down saying that I am some born again person in the view of not bringing religion. Not that, but just somebody's like, oh no, and being this champion of civil rights. No, I'm just saying there's another viewpoint. And it's important that both viewpoints can at least, I think right now, there's the white elephant in the room. People who are white who truly aren't trying to be malicious. Some are, in my opinion. But there's a group of people out there that are saying they got questions and it's intriguing to them. But if they even bring up, but what about, well, now they're afraid of being labeled a racist. So you can't. It might be a racist statement. I know that I would be saying things that would be racist, but somehow, in order for me to realize, whoa, that's not good, I need to say it. Because if I just want to keep quiet, I think more and more people will get angrier and more hardened in their views. So as frustrating as it might be for me, even right now, I don't think it's the wisest way to go by flipping out, because I don't think that's going to work. So I'm trying to urge to look at the other viewpoint and encourage discourse in some way where people can say their but and what ifs, and then education begins.
Oh my gosh, yes. I think people are flipping out because they're experiencing that discomfort of recognizing there might be something that they don't know. They're starting to feel like or hear that they're sharing a view that either now isn't acceptable or is just truly not okay, but they don't know why, because they were raised a particular way or the environment with which they exist in. And it is difficult. I spend time in our committee meetings with the Visibility Project. Our mission is about elevating the stories of unseen and unheard populations. So we've done everything from race issues to gender issues to disability issues and every time I'm trying to have a conversation about it, I feel like there's a phrase or a word or a label that has come out of my mouth that is not the way I'm supposed to say it.
Oh yeah. And
thank goodness in our environment, I can comfortably say the phrase and be like, and I'm pretty sure there's a phrase I'm now supposed to be saying. Mm-hmm. Our recent episode around substance use disorder. So, did I say it right this time?
Substance use disorder.
Okay, thank you. Right? I didn't know you didn't say addict anymore. Okay. I didn't know you didn't say substance abuse. I grew up in a family that had alcoholism as an issue. Yep. We called it substance abuse. Right. So thank goodness someone is willing to patiently smile at me and understand I'm coming from a good place, right, and say it's substance use disorder. And I feel that way about all of the topics that I just kind of fall into the category of diversity, equity, and inclusion for me, of like, I feel like I'm constantly stumbling in and have the potential to step on landmines because I don't know. And I'm so grateful for people that are willing to like put the signpost there for me to walk through in such a way that I don't blow up a landmine and I have the opportunity to learn and help others learn.
Mm-hmm. No, it makes sense.
Speaking of learning, both of you hold positions that are influential in youth's lives. Sarah, your work as director of Discover You, the Rock Center for Youth Development. We talked on this a little bit in the pre-meeting, just about the ability to have influence on them, talk to them about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Why is that important? And then why is it important for someone like Eric, who is in front of youth daily, has a big impact? He hears stories about his players coming back and saying thank you when they're in their 30s. Not to date you, but why is that? Talk a little bit about why that is important. And then Eric, I want to follow up with a question.
Mm-hmm.
For me, and my perspective, experience, opinion, I guess, and what I stand for is about people being heard. And I think it's especially important for youth to feel like their voices are heard. And when we look at it from a diversity standpoint, there is so much more variety now available for our young people. When I was growing up, it was like you only had like two paths, like you were a nurse or a teacher, for example, sure. Right? There's so much more diversity in what they can do with their careers, how they can express themselves, the choices they want to make in life, how they want to color their hair or not color their hair. There's so much more diversity there. And the opportunity to look at that as wonderful and as an amazing thing instead of an alienating or dividing thing is, I think, incredibly important for our youth to see that everyone has different strengths. One of the things that we teach with Discover You is about strengths, and everyone has different strengths, and we need everyone's strengths to come to the table in order for change to happen. So from a diversity standpoint, I'm just really key on, and I use my curiosity. I think if there's anything I would ever want to teach anyone about figuring out how to connect and learn and grow together is just get curious. Get curious about others. I use the phrase all the time, help me understand. Like, clearly there's something going on that I am unaware of. Help me understand, educate me, help me be that advocate. So using that curiosity is key, and I think we should be teaching young people about being curious in an open mind, to embrace their uniqueness and embrace the uniqueness of those around them, because then we can move towards inclusion. Mm-hmm. And young people, we all want to feel like we belong. That's why we've all gravitated towards communities that are predominantly white, for example, sure, because we want to feel like we're part of something. That's why Eric left and his family left Detroit, because it was turning black, because it just is. We generally go towards environments where we feel like we're belong and there's familiarity. But if we can see diversity as so powerful, then in embracing that, we can feel like we belong, and that's inclusive. It's probably not the exact definitions and terminologies for diversity, equity, inclusion, but that's how I see it playing out in life. That we're incredibly diverse, that's amazing, and when we can embrace that, we're then creating a sense that everyone belongs.
That's awesome, and I'm thankful for you to kind of spell that out in the terms you have, and you said something in there about everyone has different strengths. Mm-hmm. And our discussion here has been a lot about race, but Eric, I know you're a basketball coach, and I know you're a sports guy. Mm-hmm. Race, to me, loses, like, it's not seen when you start talking about who's got the strength to carry the ball up the court compared to who's got the strength, potential physical strength to be in the low post, who's got the better three-point shot. Doesn't matter if you're white, black, Asian,
sure,
Spanish. It doesn't matter, because out on the court, it's all about coming together as a team and everybody coming together as one and everybody being included. So talk a little bit about that, what that's been like for you, and how does sports have a reflection in that space?
Well, yeah, very naively, most of my heroes were black. Dave Bing, number 20. I still remember the kids at 4th grade, St. Matthew's in Detroit. And a lot of the kids wanted to either be Richard Nixon or Spiro Agnew, and I wanted to be Dave Bing. So I think I was on the better side of history, actually. But anyway, because he ended up being mayor of Detroit, quite honestly. But besides how he could play. So I had a naive view of my heroes were black. Bob Gibson's Bob Gibson,
Right.
and that type of. So
He could throw a wicked slider.
yeah, as long as he wasn't pitching against you in the '68 World Series, and so when I didn't like him. But anyway, what was interesting to me that running full circle. Well, here's the path. You go from there, and then when you're competing in sports, I realized that there was an extra part when I would participate against all black teams where these guys do not like me. And I'm going there going, I want to win. And then all of a sudden, so my knee-jerk reaction was, well, if you don't like me because I'm white, screw you. I don't like you because you're black. I'm out here to win. And that was the mindset you adopted. But I remember always going, what's the big deal? Why do they hate me? I have no perspective, no realization. I just was totally clueless. Right. So you go from that and you try to justify your beliefs. You get older to where finally then you're starting to read and you're like, wait a minute. Like Bob Gibson had to couldn't eat in the same restaurant as his teammates going to the minor leagues down south in the early 60s. St. Louis Hawks had this great basketball player, but because he was black, St. Louis was rather racist at the time where they kind of didn't let him in. Bill Russell, 11 out of 13 years, he wins a title. And one time they broke into his house and defecated in his bed in Boston. You're just sitting there going, what? So that's how naive I was. So I go from just dealing with it where I'm dealing with kind of the end result. It's not this overarching, I would base my experiences that might be negative with someone who's black, like that's the end all. It's like I am not understanding the history behind this at all because I'm totally ignorant on it. So then it makes a little more sense to me. Does that mean that when I compete, I'm going to back down? No. I obviously don't know me. I want to win against my mom if she was alive or anybody. I want to win. So cutting full circle to say, wait a minute, the things they had to do to even get recognized.
Sure.
And that's something that has always struck me with, if people could discourse, people would say, well, I just believe we're all in this, we all pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. It's like, it's kind of an analogy of, well, it's not really, because for every Dave Bing that made it, there might be 5 who didn't. And because the bar was uneven. And we don't want to hear that. I think it's a bit of white rage that I've had in my life because I don't know why it's rage, but it comes out very violent. Like, no, it can't be. I guess maybe when our core beliefs get shook, and I don't care what it is, whether it's your religion, whether it's your core belief on any topic, when that gets shook, I think generally it's fear. And what I've learned over fear is that you either freeze, you flee, or you fight. So everybody reacts differently. So we are witnessing, I believe, a reaction to white people being afraid of, wait a minute, could we be wrong? And what's that mean if we are wrong? And so there's a decent number that we react with fight. I think Krause household, we didn't. I think it was more flee in a gentle way, like let's just avoid it. Sure. Which is a fleeing of some nature. So we didn't fight it. Right. We would flee and just avoid it. It came out, the fight would come out of me in sports. There's no doubt stronger than probably most, because I think it still was driven by fear. Gotcha. So I just think that's just my latest theory, but that's what makes sense to me.
Well, which is why I think it's so important that we're having this conversation, and there's a tie to education. There's a tie to working with youth, because in order for them to not have to have those coping skills of fight, flight, freeze, fold, all of those, right? We don't want people to cope. We want people to thrive. And so to be able to create an environment where that discourse can happen, where someone can comfortably say, I have ignorance in this area, help me. Right. And someone can kindly provide that knowledge and education and walk with someone. That's the only way people are going to change. And so there's an obligation, I feel like, that we have to create that environment, especially for young people. We all know I feel strongly about young people, but like to create that environment for young people. But it's a challenge then for us as adults to do it ourselves.
I agree 100%. I learned something that what you said struck with me. It had to do with an incident at school, and the kids knew that I spoke out, and the kids knew that my particular political views, I don't lie to kids, and so of course they knew that I was not a Donald Trump fan, and so it's like, and so we would tease each other and joke, and I would say, guys, come on. I go, I voted for Ronald Reagan twice, so in my life I have been Republican, and then you go into education, so you're more direct. So I go, I get it, I'm not, I think it would be very hypocritical of me to really go off. First of all, it's you're going against what you should be doing as a public educator. Second, it would be hypocritical because I had voted Republican in my life as well. So you have your views and so forth. But what was interesting was that by state, I think kids especially have a BS meter. They know if people are just trying to say what they think they should say versus just saying the truth. And so when I would tell the kids, different students that were in the classroom this past year, it was interesting because I'm not saying I changed your mind, and nor was that that's not really my job at all, but it was just, they asked, I talked about it, and I gave them my reason, and I wanted to make sure they knew I didn't mean any ill will towards the student and so forth. I just felt, based on the school board's beliefs and our roles as educators, here's why I felt that. And I listened to them and I said, you guys aren't freaking out. I heard you guys are really causing hassle. And they go, you're listening to us and allowing us to talk. And I wasn't even aware I was doing that because I'm not that bright. So it just happened. I lucked out in this case. So they said, you're listening and willing to let us talk as opposed to shout us down. And I think we have to do that with we need people my age, older, younger, to say, I don't buy this because this happened to me. A black group of guys did this to me. And what about affirmative action? And they have to be allowed to state their objections without fear of being typecast. And I'm not saying they will ever get away from it. I'm saying we have to try to at least show another viewpoint. And I think for everybody, they'll adjust different ways and so forth, but we have to try, and I keep going to the phrase, the white elephant in the room. We have to allow those things because otherwise we're just dancing. And I'm getting too old and I don't have many years left. So it's like, I don't have time to dance. We have to get into it. We may have to take the gloves off and know that we might have to punch each other with bare knuckles with a ref there, with people to be able to say, let's calm down now and still shake hands, but we might have to we have to take the gloves off because we're running out of time.
We have to do the hard work.
Yep.
It sounds like that's some tips for the listeners, but that's honestly kind of my last follow-up question. And Sarah, I'll start with you. What do you want to leave our listeners with? What do you want them to think about as they finish up this podcast?
Well, for me, it's about personal growth and creating that environment for discourse. And so I think maybe the big question I want listeners to start asking themselves is maybe why? Why am I responding this way? Why am I reacting this way? Why do I have this perspective? Where is that opportunity for them to grow? So then that pushes towards a willingness to step into the ring and do the hard work and have the conversation.
Eric, what about you? What do you ask of our listeners?
Yeah, I'll piggyback on it and say we are good, again, at BSing ourselves. Quit trying to fake ourselves out. Spit out what we think. Analyze it. We might be able to answer some of it and say, well, don't try to be embarrassed about, just say, here's what I think, and then analyze your own. Pretend you almost have a two-way conversation and analyze what you're thinking, why, and try to build a case and then say, all right, here's what I'm thinking because this really hits home with me. Why is this wrong? And then hear another viewpoint and kind of go from there. Don't try to whitewash and ignore things that have occurred, whether it's in our own history or your own personal history. Don't ignore it. And if you have those feelings, get them out. And then from there, you might be hopefully you're open to another viewpoint and you'll be more open to, like Sarah said, personal growth, because we have to grow right now, because if we're stuck where we are in this country, it's getting scary.
I'd like to thank you both for being on the podcast today. Eric, Sarah, you already know I admire you. For the listeners who don't know, Sarah and I have a good history. Eric, I very much admire your willingness to look at this and say, I'm a couple years from retirement, but that doesn't mean anything to me when it comes down to needing to make a change in where I work and with the kids I represent and the kids I work for. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You can stay connected with the Visibility Project by subscribing, liking, and sharing on your favorite podcasting and social apps. Look for us at the Visibility PRJ.
Financial support is needed to keep the conversation going. Go to midlandfoundation.org/give and select the Cultural Awareness Coalition Endowment Fund to be part of the project. Note podcast in your donation notes.
Thank you for listening.
We see you.
We hear you.
And together, we are making a difference.